Good, perfect. So, hi everyone. My name is Clementine Jarrett. I am a volunteer with the Canadian Coalition for the Rights of Children, or the CCRC for short. And I am so excited to be here today to speak to you all about the Canadian Coalition for the Rights of Children's Child and Youth Engagement process with the 5th and 6th United Nations Review of Canadian Children's Rights. So that's a long sort of title. I'll explain everything. There's a lot of moving components to it. But before that, I just wanted to express gratitude and acknowledgement for the lands that I occupy. I currently reside on Algonquin Anishinaabe land, which is colonially known as Ottawa. I am definitely lucky to be able to occupy the space and get all that I do from the land that I'm on, and it's really important to acknowledge the colonial pain of our past and our present that was put upon Indigenous peoples of Canada. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. Okay. So today, I wanted to speak to you in particular about the process that we underwent at the CCRC. And I'll sort of preface this by saying that, our primary focus at the CCRC is to defend the rights of children in accordance to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. While that is true, the tools and mechanisms that I'll be outlining today, they can be applied to the promotion of human rights as a whole. They're not specific to children's rights. And, oftentimes I really do quite say, like, children's rights and human rights, they're one and the same, right? Not only are children and youth human, but they're also the future adults of tomorrow. They're the future leaders of tomorrow. And so I think it's really important to take both things very seriously and not separate them as much in regards to importance and topic. So I will be specifying that a lot of these things are related to children's rights, but they can be applied to human rights as a whole. So within this session, my goal is to share a little bit about the process, like I said, after which I will speak to 3 crucial elements of children's rights accountability that revealed itself throughout our enlightening process. So in other words, if children's rights accountability were a recipe of some sort, then the 3 following things would be its unchangeable ingredients that are crucial to its success. So these ingredients are engagement as a precursor to accountability, the standardization of youth interventions within governmental context, and the establishment of standards in communication between youth and government. So you can see that listed here. Oh dear. Sorry, my slide doesn't seem to be working. All right, here you go. So these are the 3 foundations that I just listed before. And as a sort of common denominator among these 3 things are voice and visibility. These are crucial if we want to hold any governmental body accountable to any promise that they make. As a researcher and youth myself, it's undeniable that when promises are made by systems, institutions, and even individuals, it's seldom the case that these promises are upheld without that healthy amount of pressure from the outside eye. And really this applies to so many things in our daily lives. For example, say we're friends and you do me a favor, and in return, I promise that I will mow your lawn. The mechanism of accountability there is quite simple. It's visibility and voice. So, if I don't mow your lawn, you will be able to see that and call me out on it. So in addition to these 3 foundations, we need to realize that, being able to see the outcome and speak on it, that's as important as the foundations that I've identified. And I can give you the CCRC guarantee that these foundations of accountability that I'm recommending, they're backed by extensive research and firsthand accounts of children and youth that have not had their rights realized, despite Canada's ratification of the UNCRC 32 years ago. So without further ado, I will begin to speak on the actual engagement process that the CCRC conducted. So this is just a bit of an agenda. I'll start with introducing the process and introducing the entire project as a whole. Then I'll speak to our key findings. I've also, in the past, I've related our findings to, related children's rights to the topic of health. I won't be doing that today, but I can if we have enough time. And last but not least, I have a sort of call to action. And then we'll speak a lot more about the mechanisms I outlined beforehand. So, like I said at the beginning, there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of sort of complicated terms. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of the UNCRC and the UN review process. So essentially, the UNCRC is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. You can see UNICEF Canada has created a child-friendly version of the UNCRC, and I've put that on the right here. There are a lot of moving parts to it, but the main thing that you need to know is that there are about 54 articles that sort of outline the rights of children that should not be isolated among a specific demographic. It should be universal, and the problem is that they aren't, functionally speaking. And so that's why we have a UN review process. The UN review process hopes to identify and investigate Canada's gaps in its implementation of the UNCRC. And throughout our actual project, we hoped to emphasize the importance and benefits of child and youth engagement leading up to Canada's periodic review. So I just wanted to speak on the team that sort of led the project. So first I'll introduce Kate Butler, PhD. So she was one of the two project leads, and Kate is an accomplished children's rights consultant, and this is outdated. She is the former president and chair of the CCRC. We just actually moved on to two co-chairs, which I'll speak to later. But yeah, Kate is amazing. She, at the time, was the president and chair of the CCRC, and she's been a great support to me personally as well, in teaching me all that I really know about children's rights. So then there's me, Clementine Jarrett. Throughout the course of the project, I was a research assistant and a youth engagement facilitator. I am a child rights advocate whose activism is based on both lived and professional experience. So for those of you who know me, you know that I am a survivor of the foster care system, and I am a firm advocate in improving child welfare within Canada. I use my experiences of abuse and harm in my childhood to sort of inform my advocacy and add a personal element to every word that I say. Third, we have Alexi Cosette, who was the data analyst for the project. This is also outdated. She is the former senior coordinator of youth participation with UNICEF Canada and an advocate for child participation rights. So she just moved on, but up until like about a week ago, really, she was an integral part of UNICEF Canada's youth participation team, and she was amazing. She was amazing in this actual project as well. And last but not least, we have Terrence Hamilton, who was the other project lead. Terrence is a policy and advocacy specialist with UNICEF Canada and is now one of the co-chairs of the CCRC. So he moved on from being a board member to being one of the two people that runs the show. So that's the sort of team that we have here. But in the center is the children and youth that were involved. We had around 400 participants and post-engagement advisors across Canada. And it was such a pleasure to be able to work with so many youth that were so dedicated to the cause. It was amazing. I've learned so much. I've learned a lot about how willing youth are when it comes to advocating for their own rights. Sorry about that slide mishap. And it was really inspiring. As an advocate myself, I think I've learned a lot about being vulnerable and being courageous and saying the words that no one else really wants to. So a huge thank you to all of the children and youth that were involved. We could not have done it without them. Great. So first, I will outline the engagement process, and it was sort of like a four-part process that took the course of maybe just a bit under 2 years. So first, we had the surveys that we administered. We gathered data using UNICEF's Report program, and I will actually include some links to that in the following slides if you're interested. And we also used SurveyMonkey. So we sent those surveys to youth all across Canada, and we got a lot of responses, a lot of data indicating the experiences of youth in relation to their rights. And, unfortunately, a lot of the data indicated that youth feel as if their rights have not been respected, within their individual communities and the systems and institutions that they interact with. Second, we had discussions. So this was, both in person and virtual. And we were supported by the Students' Commission of Canada, or the SCC's Canada We Want conference. So in 2022, there were both virtual and in-person sessions with youth, where the CCRC sort of visited and consulted with all of the youth involved to get their input and opinions on children's rights. Third, we had roundtables. So these were virtual roundtables, and we had 3 different topics that we sort of conducted or focused on. The first topic was youth in and from foster care. The second topic was mental health and disability. And the third topic was Indigenous children's rights. So we definitely had to sort of divide the roundtable process. We wanted to make sure that each roundtable was specific to a sort of topic that was central to our research. And so it was really helpful to have a sort of focused group where we had, youth in care that could relate to each other, and Indigenous children that could relate to each other, and folks with disabilities that also could relate to each other. It made the space a lot more comfortable, I think, for the youth involved. And fun fact, I was actually a youth involved myself. Before becoming a research assistant, I was a roundtable participant who shared their opinions within the Youth in and from Care roundtable. So it's really cool to reflect on that. I really started as someone who wanted to just give my opinion, and eventually moved on to co-author our final report. So it's a really fun sort of origin story. So the last sort of phase of the engagement process was our report and final meeting. So there was a youth-led report. Like I said, I was a co-author of that report along with the other team members that I indicated in the previous slide. And we also included a letter that was written by our post-engagement youth team. So these were a group of, I think, 12 youth that sort of came together to speak to government officials. And they were the ones that were at the forefront of our summative meeting between youth and government officials that, had to basically listen to what we had to say. And this included the United Nations delegation of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. So, the Canadian delegation, my apologies. So we had the head of that delegation come in. We also had folks from Canadian Heritage come in as well. And our goal was to engage in a sort of dialogue between the youth that were at the forefront of this conversation and between government officials. So I wanted to share some notable statistics that we gathered from the surveys that we administered. Unfortunately, only 1 in 4 respondents believe that children's rights were respected during the pandemic. We found that 70% of survey respondents strongly believe that Parliament should review all new laws and policies to make sure that they protect and promote children's rights. And finally, only 16% feel that they've been sufficiently taught about children's rights in school. So these are just some of the many, startling findings that we gathered from the survey process. It was really difficult, honestly, to have to confront the truth, but that's what makes it all the more important. Unfortunately, these things don't go away if we refuse to acknowledge or look at them. And so, as difficult as it was, I was glad that these things were being brought to light. And we eventually were able to, put this on the national stage and bring it to governmental attention. So that definitely was, I guess, the silver lining out of all of this. And I spoke to you just a minute ago about U-Report. So I just wanted to give a bit of context about this because it's a really helpful tool. And I encourage you all in your respective organizations to spread the word about it if you work with any youth or if you know any youth that would be, helpful for this tool. So U-Report is a free polling platform developed by UNICEF Canada for youth ages 13 to 24. It is a unique way to get quick, real-time pulse checks of young people's views about issues that they care about and to involve youth in decisions that affect them. So there are, there are a lot of questions that are asked. And they're really important because they offer a real-time sort of snapshot on issues that UNICEF Canada inquires about. So I've included some QR codes in these slides. So I'll just wait a few moments for you to be able to scan them. I'll just maybe count to 10. All right, moving on to the next one. Again, I'll just count to 10. I believe that this is WhatsApp here. Sorry for the image not working. Alrighty, and last but not least, if you're on Messenger, feel free to scan this QR code. Okay, perfect. Great. So now we'll move on to the key findings of our project. So first, we identified that child protection systems lack responsiveness. Thus, we recommended the implementation of accountability systems for government and child welfare agencies that are visible, accessible, understandable, and accountable to children and young people. Second, we found that children and young people aren't treated as decision makers or experts with lived experience. So we recommended meaningful opportunities for young people to engage with governments, institutions, and systems on important issues. Third, we saw a lack of coordinated mental health resources and strategies. So we recommended increased mental health support for children and young people, especially in the wake of the pandemic, which was really hard for youth that were to experience poverty or domestic violence. As someone, again, I was a child, I was a minor during the pandemic, and so in care it was really difficult for me. In the abusive foster homes that I've been in, it's hard to not have refuge. And my mental health definitely did suffer in result. So that definitely resonates with me, and it's a huge sort of topic that is really under supported at the moment. Continued. Fourth, we identified discrimination faced by Indigenous children, both on and off reserve. And so we recommended the prioritization of the rights of Indigenous children and youth, including their rights to health and environment, right? So that's referring to clean water, healthcare, climate change, support as well. There are a lot of ramifications of the climate crisis that hit Indigenous communities disproportionately. And as well as other low-income racialized communities as well. Environmental racism is, again, a topic that is underdeveloped and underexplored, that we definitely call to government officials and the United Nations Committee to investigate more and pay more attention to. Fifth, we saw that discrimination against Black, Indigenous, people of color, low income, disabled, and LGBTQ plus children. That seemed to be rampant, and an experience that a lot of survey respondents and roundtable participants shared and spoke on. So we prioritize the elimination of racism and discrimination against children by ensuring cultural rights are met and that structurally vulnerable communities are prioritized. And finally, we saw a lack of knowledge about children's rights. So we recommend an increase of awareness and education on children's rights at an early age. So I'm talking, in elementary school, children's rights should be implemented within our curricula. That's really important because when we have children that are knowledgeable about their rights, it'll allow them to identify when their rights are not being respected or realized, and they're more empowered to say something about it. And it's equally important for adults to have, an in-depth knowledge about children's rights as well. And that way, allies can appropriately support youth and their children, and advocate for their participation, their healthy and safe participation within the systems and institutions that they interact with. So these were our key findings, and they all sort of contributed to our overall recommendation, which was, what we want is action, said the youth. Children and youth want to see a clear strategy for the implementation of children's rights in Canada that includes reporting back to young people on what the government is doing to ensure that they can realize their rights. So I just wanted to highlight a sort of keyword or a key sort of part of this sentence, which is reporting back to young people on what the government is doing. Like I mentioned before, that speaks to visibility, the visibility aspect of accountability that we'll explore more. But it's, the fact that it's in our overall recommendation speaks to how key this portion is. We can't have a nation that adequately respects children's rights if we don't have any way to see what's happening or to identify the current state of affairs. So visibility, again, it's central to our overall recommendation. It's central to the entire practice of holding government officials accountable. So before I move forward, I've spoken quite a bit. I wanted to ask you all if you have any questions before I move forward, any comments, anything at all. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if not, we can move on. I'll wait 10 to 15 seconds. Cool. Yeah, thanks for the question, Nexi. So, in total, we consulted with around 400 young people, and this sort of spanned across the 4 phases of our research process. Yeah, it's a great number, and it's a really hard number to achieve as well, I will say, especially since for all of the youth that were involved in our discussions, be it virtual or in person, we ensured that they had sort of compensation. So we gave the youth honoraria to ensure that their experiences and the trauma that they might have spoken to was, compensated in a way that we could handle. Unfortunately, we would love to give so much more, but it's hard to be able to manage that while engaging in research and the cost of research. But we did ensure that the youth were compensated as well. So that definitely, it was a large number, but it allowed the data and our findings to be all the more accurate, which is exactly why I gave you that guarantee at the beginning that my recommendations and these tools and these mechanisms, they're sound. They're based on the research. They're based on the input of youth, and they make a lot of sense once you consider the research process and the process that we underwent. Do we have any other questions? Thanks so much, Nexi. I really appreciate that. I'll wait maybe 15 seconds again, and then we can move on. Oh, yeah, that's a great question, Celine. So, so honestly, I might have mentioned at the beginning, but I started to get involved. I'll just sort of rewind to the slide with all of the phases. So I started to get involved with the CCRC at this phase, so the roundtable phase of the project. So I came in a little bit late and wasn't privy to the way in which they sort of recruited youth. But I do know that the survey process was really the jumping pad to everything. So I'm quite sure that they sent it, they meaning Terrence and Kate, who were the project leads, they, using like UNICEF U-Report's large and wide reach, they were able to get a lot of input from youth across Canada. And with the SurveyMonkey survey as well, I'm sure they were able to send it to a lot of community partners and peers to get their input as well. I first actually met the CCRC, being Kate and Terrence, at the Students' Commission of Canada We Want forum. So I was actually in the in-person forum where Kate and Terrence came to speak on the project at that point in time. So far, what they had already kind of completed was the survey process, and then they moved on to, speaking to youth on the virtual and in-person sphere. So I actually, it's funny, after they finished speaking, I approached Terrence because I think I was like 17 at the time, or I just turned 17, and I was really eager to help. I'm 20 now, so it's been 3 years. But I was really eager to help and to get involved, because when they were speaking on the process, it was just really inspiring, and it felt like something that was long overdue. And so I personally approached them, and they were really willing to send me resources and to forward the link to the roundtables that were conducted a few months later. And they allowed all of the youth in attendance of the Canada We Want Forum to be able to reach out to them. And they offered, the entire forum a chance to continue to be involved in the process. And so I think it's a mixture of the surveys and the discussions that really allowed the CCRC to get a wide array of youth involved. And that's what made it so rich and so authentic. It was really comfortable, and I think, apart from the actual recruitment of youth, the CCRC was really good at maintaining the involvement of youth as well. They engaged youth in a way that was ethical and empowering, and this process is one that I will forever be indebted to, because it sort of started my career as a child rights advocate. It taught me a lot about how research should be conducted. It taught me a lot about how to engage youth in an ethical and empowering way. And so, I think that, it was all over the place. I can't necessarily pinpoint an exact sort of way that we gathered youth, but we kept including people along the way. And I was one of those youth that kind of got scooped in, and I've been attached to the CCRC at the hip ever since. So yeah, that's a long answer to your question. But it definitely was along the course of the process of the 2-year process. Thank you so much. Do we have any other questions? Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it really is a cute story, honestly. It's really nice to be able to, move on from being a participant of the project to a research associate to then a youth engagement facilitator who kind of took a leadership role among my peers. And yeah, now I'm involved in a lot in the community. I do a lot of child rights advocacy. And I have the CCRC to thank, which is why I'm always around. So yeah, so that's answering that question. Do we have any other questions? And if not, I can continue to speak on the foundations of accountability. Okay, so if we do have any other questions or comments, please feel free to let me know. I personally struggle with typing speed, and so whenever someone asks, "Oh, do you have any questions?" I scramble and struggle to submit one in time. So if you're like me, no worries. Feel free to press send whenever you want. And yeah, so now we'll move forward. So like I mentioned at the beginning, there are 3 sort of foundations that of accountability that I wanted to speak on. Like I mentioned, we did sort of create a final report that amalgamated all of our data, our findings, and our recommendations. And we submitted that report, and we presented that report to the Canadian delegation of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child, as well as to other government officials. But it's important to note that in the report, we didn't necessarily give them all of the answers, right? This is something that, we wanted to highlight the importance of accountability measures. But at the same time, it's important that the government themselves do the work and also meet us halfway in sort of ensuring that their methods and their strategies of accountability is realistic for them as well. So these sort of measures and mechanisms, I've compiled them myself, and these are mechanisms that sort of emerged from the actual process. So this is what I saw throughout our findings and our data, and from the firsthand accounts of the youth involved. And I haven't consulted with anyone from government on, the way that this would particularly work, but that's definitely something that could be done and that should be done, right? I think that when it comes to actual tools and mechanisms, it's something that government officials and civil society organizations need to collaborate on, right? It can't just be one or the other, because I think it's the civil society organizations that have a more accurate understanding of how youth can be involved in a healthy and ethical way. And then we have government officials who have more of an insight on what would be practical for them and realistic for them. And they would understand more than anyone what they're willing to do. And so if we have that information, we would be able to maybe push back. If they're not willing to do much, we could again engage in that advocacy, get youth to speak to them, and involve them in interventions, which I'll talk about in a bit. So this is just, that's a long way of saying that this is just a perspective from civil society. wasn't consulted. We didn't consult government officials yet on these, but I think that these tools are definitely clear within our research process, and they seem to be crucial if we want to truly ensure that children's rights are respected, and we hold government accountable for respecting children's rights. So, long preamble. I'll start with the first sort of foundational element of accountability, and that is engagement as a precursor to accountability. So, youth engagement is super important. It's not something that we've prioritized historically. Honestly, youth engagement is just now beginning to be a lot more valued within civil society. And that is a very good thing. It's an amazing thing, because when it comes to children's rights, there are no better experts than children themselves. I have no sort of reservation in saying that. And the problem that we see really is that we don't see children as experts on matters that affect them. We sort of hesitate. We think of their age and we evaluate their maturity, and we think, okay, they can't handle it, and so we'll just do all of the work as adults. But the problem with that is that there are pockets of information and experiences that adults just can't reach, right? When it comes to the experiences of children during the pandemic, no adult will be able to truly understand what that was like, even if this adult were to be a parent of a youth during the pandemic, or a sibling of a youth during the pandemic. You need to have these first-hand perspectives, okay, like this primary data, if we want to approach it from a sociological research point of view, to ensure that we're going about things in an accurate way that reflects reality rather than what we think is reality. So engagement is a necessary and invariable precursor to accountability. We need to emphasize the significance and the importance of involving youth in decision-making processes. It's a foundational step to ensuring that government officials are held accountable. We need to prioritize their engagement and foster a sense of ownership and responsibility and involvement. And that way, youth will also gain experience in doing this as an adult, in the future. I spoke a little bit about, my sort of origins in this process. And yeah, I started out as a youth that was given the opportunity to speak. I was given a sort of voice or a platform by the CCRC, and now I am a child rights advocate, and I advocate for children on a national sphere, right? And so it sort of, what I mean to say or speak to is that it can start out small. It can start out as giving youth the ability to share their experiences and their insights, and it can set them up for the rest of their lives. It can create an army of leaders, of well-articulated leaders that are able to advocate effectively with valuable insights. And so it definitely isn't something that is respected on a wide scale right now, but it's getting better. Youth engagement is being a lot more prioritized than it was even 10 years ago. So that's something that we're seeing in real time, and it's definitely a valuable shift in our paradigm. So second, we have the standardization of youth interventions within governmental context. And by intervention, I mean, there are a lot of different ways that an intervention can take place. Interventions can be written, they can be spoken. But what I'm really referring to is an opportunity for youth to communicate, to engage in dialogue within governmental context. So, for example, I think it was earlier this year in perhaps May, sometime during the summertime, I went up to Halifax with with parents. Kate joined us virtually, unfortunately, and Hala Murraywood, who is one of the current co-chairs of the CCRC. So with Kate, parents, and Hala, we attended a forum that was attended by federal, provincial, and territorial ministers responsible for human rights. And within this forum, I got the chance to provide an intervention. I spoke to, the findings of our process of this entire project. And then I also spoke to my own experiences as a youth who has not had their rights realized in many instances, really throughout my entire life. I've been a victim of abuse really all the way up until my adulthood, until I became an adult. And even as an adult, I've struggled a lot with my safety and well-being, unfortunately. And it's definitely hard to speak on, but I found it very enriching to be able to, talk to somebody other than the mirror, right? And to be able to put words and value to my experiences, because it's really hard to manage all of these memories and my trauma and PTSD. But when I'm able to share it in certain contexts among federal, provincial, and territorial ministers, as well as other civil society organizations, it sort of inspires me, and it gives me hope that, the abuse that I've experienced in foster care and within my educational institutions, there is a chance that reality will not be repeated in the life of another child. And so, I wanted to speak a little bit about that, intervention that I was able to be involved in, because it was really valuable, really enriching and empowering. And that's why I can sort of see the importance of interventions, of youth interventions. So yeah, again, we need to normalize, approaches and protocols for interventions that target youth within governmental structures. So we should involve youth in meetings and in forums. We should allow youth to write letters, maybe conduct a group where youth can speak on a particular issue. Right now, we're seeing a lot of conflict surrounding pronoun usage in schools, in educational institutions. And that's something that I see youth are not really being involved in. The conversations are really just adults and governmental officials sort of arguing, right? And there aren't many youth perspectives that are being prioritized and put at the forefront. And so that's just, a current example of how youth intervention could be valuable and really needs to happen. And we're not really used to, again, like I said, we're not totally used to youth engagement. And in the same way, we haven't yet embraced youth intervention as well. But when we actually invite youth to governmental spaces, to these official high-level spaces, we need to understand that they can add things of value. In the same way that youth engagement is necessary, youth interventions are as well. So involving these youth would allow for more visibility and voice. Again, we're kind of returning to those common denominators, visibility and voice. Youth need to be able to see these processes where governments, interact and engage in conversations. They need to see what's happening, to see the current state of affairs, and then they need to be able to speak on it. The so what of everything. What next? Right? They have these opinions, and they should be able to have a platform where they can share them. Okay, and last but not least, we have the establishment of standards in communication between youth and government. So this is one that is really important and dear to my heart. And in very simple terms, what I'm talking about is making dialogue clear and accessible. When it comes to when it comes to conversations between youth and government, I think it's almost a rule right now that these conversations are one-sided and often uncomfortable, and inaccessible to youth. And I say that with a lot of experience in participating in governmental sort of conversations and affairs. Like I mentioned, I just attended that federal, provincial, and territorial meeting forum in Halifax. And I also mentioned sort of near the beginning that there was a conversation held with the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child. We had the Canadian delegation from that committee attend our meeting, as well as government officials from Canadian Heritage and Justice Canada. And within that meeting, we also had youth. We had the post-engagement youth advisory team speak to these government officials and present our findings and recommendations. And we also allowed them to, input their own experiences and insights within their advocacy. So that meeting was held, I think it was held in January of this year. So it was a while ago, almost a year ago. But I will never forget how inaccessible it was. I'll be very honest. It was really difficult for the youth involved because the conversation was definitely rich. It was really important and valuable. But the problem was that the language that was being used by government officials, it was very complex, very complicated, very condensed. And, so I'm still pursuing my bachelor's degree. I'm studying human rights and social justice and feminist studies with a minor in community engagement at Carleton University. But before, I actually was in a different program called Public Affairs and Policy Management. And that is a very politics-heavy program. They kind of sort of train you to be a future parliamentarian. And so that's a sort of theoretical background that I have. I have a lot of knowledge surrounding, government speak. And even I, within that meeting, struggled a lot with understanding what these officials were saying. And so when it comes to engaging youth and having youth involved and giving them the chance to intervene, we need to ensure that the dialogue that is being held, we need to make sure that they can actually understand what's being said. Because again, you can't have voice and visibility. There needs to be an understanding among these things. You can't do anything with something that you see if you don't understand what you're seeing, right? And when it comes to speaking out, you can say as much as you want, but if you're being met with something that you can't understand, it's very discouraging. It's hard to really get back from that. And unfortunately, I saw that sort of element of discouragement among the youth that advocated in that meeting in January. And, it's something that's beyond our control at the CCRC. But I think that if we at least put it within our consciousness, if we raise attention to the importance of accessible dialogue, maybe things could be better in the future. As we're promoting youth engagement, as we're promoting youth interventions, we need to also promote accessible dialogue that is youth and child friendly. So those are the three foundations. And like I said, voice and visibility sort of rings true throughout all of them, right? Returning to the mowing the lawn example, I need to, give you a chance to see the lawn that may or may not be mowed. If I sort of bar you from that area, if I keep you inside and take the key, then there's no way of you knowing if I actually mowed the lawn or not. There's no way that accountability can take place if you're unable to see what's happening and subsequently say something about what's happening. And that's exactly what we want youth to be able to do. And like I said, this isn't just specific to children and youth. This is applicable to all human rights concerns. That is regardless of age, demographic, class. This is applicable to every action that we want in order to promote an equitable and healthy and kind world for everyone. That's, like we say about human rights, they're inalienable, right? They are something that should be universally applied to everyone and aren't through function and in reality. And we need to make sure that they are. And so I hope that this process sort of illuminated some of that for you. I wanted to open the floor for questions again. You can ask anything about the mechanisms and sort of foundations that I outlined right here. And you can also inquire about the process again. But yeah, what I really wanted to communicate is that, the process itself, that isn't something that you can do every year or every month, right? The process that the CCRC underwent, it was almost 2 years of hard work and dedication, and it was held in preparation for Canada's periodic review before the United Nations. And so that obviously isn't something that is, a regular thing. That's not something that you can do all the time, every month or every week. But what we can do every month, every week, every day, every hour is that we can, prioritize things like youth engagement, like youth interventions. We can ensure that our dialogue is accessible and welcoming and child and youth friendly. We can grab these foundations that we learned from our engagement process, and we can apply it to the work that we do in our everyday lives. It doesn't even have to be official. If you work in a school or if you work with children in any other way, you can take these sort of qualities and apply it to their care and to their education and to supporting them. You don't need to be a government official, or you don't need to be a part of the Canadian delegation of the United Nations Committee on the Rights of the Child to ensure that youth are heard and to ensure that youth can see what's happening in regards to matters that affect them. So I wanted to open the floor to any comments and questions in relation to this. I'll wait about 10 to 15 seconds, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I'll perhaps wait another 10 seconds. And again, this is just opening the floor up to any questions that you may have for me on either the process or the foundations of accountability that I shared. And yeah, if you wanted to share anything as well. Thank you so much, Elaine. That's really, really kind of you to say. Great. And the next step. Okay, yeah, the next steps for the CCRC. That's a really good question. So yeah, I think the CCRC, we're really unique in the sense that we have the sort of freedom to focus on so many different things, right? We advocate for youth and issues across Canada, right? All matters that affect children and youth rights. We're sort of there. We're definitely willing to extend our advocacy and help. And so after the project itself, we've sort of focused on communicating our findings throughout civil society. So we've had a lot of meetings and presentations. I've also personally been involved in many of those to ensure that what we found, all of the findings, that they're not that they do not go in vain, right? We need to make sure that this invaluable data and information is being used and consistently referred to, because it was a long process, and it was a very careful process as well. And like I've been saying, the data that we found, it's incredibly accurate and sound. It's based on the primary perspectives of children and young people. And we need to ensure that this information is widespread and well known. And so, yeah, in that sense, the CCRC, we've been focused on sort of sharing this within government and civil society, and ensuring that this information is well known and heard among government officials, parliamentarians, and individuals as well. I think I saw that my connection sort of failed. Can anyone hear me okay? I hope I didn't drop. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. The next steps from like this point onward, that's definitely to be determined. I know that there was a board meeting recently, and while I'm not sure, I'm not a part of the board myself. So while I'm not sure what specific concrete plans were gathered or put forth, I definitely do know that the CCRC does not stop. We are a very persistent group, and we're also always open to collaboration and conversations with other members of civil society. So please, if you're interested, please reach out. I'll return to the slide with our contact information. But yeah, I think there's a lot of more work to be done. So, there definitely isn't a shortage of projects and initiatives that we can pay attention to. So we have another comment. So true what you're saying about accessible language. That is so important. Yeah, I definitely agree. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's something that we often forget. And I think especially because youth engagement is such a new sort of topic and practice, we're forgetting that it's not enough to just invite youth to the table and to the conversation. You actually need to talk to them, right? You actually need to ensure that the seat is put up high enough, or that the table, isn't spiky and pointed with thorns, right? We need to ensure that we're not hurting youth, we're not hurting the self-esteem of youth as we involve them. And there's definitely a lot more work to be done in relation to our empathy with youth when they're engaged with matters that affect them. It's not enough to just invite them and say good luck. I hope that that's something that we can work on in the future as a society. If not, we won't really have the chance to take full advantage of youth engagement and youth intervention. We won't have the chance to have a dialogue, a back and forth, where we can learn from each other, right? So yeah, I definitely think that's important. I definitely agree. Thanks for listening. Do we have any other comments and questions? And I guess I'm also willing to open the floor to anyone who wants to share any of their own sort of recommendations or thoughts or insights on accountability. Do you agree? Do you disagree with what I shared? Feel free to share your opinion in either way. I'd love to hear your thoughts and sort of have a conversation again, a dialogue, if you're interested in sharing. I'll wait about 10 to 15 seconds. Okay, so we have a comment. Researchers often use academic language, yet it can come across as pretentious. Yes, I definitely. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I definitely try to use plain language as well. Um, it's hard. It's hard. I definitely can understand the perspectives of folks that are either in academia or in government who are unable to sort of resist that that habit of speaking with long and elaborate vocabulary. But I think what reminds me of the importance of accessibility within language is that I remember how hard it was for me to start in university and for me to do my readings and like not understand what the authors are saying. And having like a 10-page reading take a lot longer than it should have. It would sort of be the equivalent of a 20-page reading just because of the language that's being used. So, as a researcher myself, I'm engaging in another research project as we speak. That's separate from the CCRC, sorry, but is related to youth engagement within healthcare, pediatric healthcare, and so yeah, I hold it really dear to my heart. I think that it's really important to use accessible language within academia, within government. It allows a lot more people to participate and to feel valued and to feel welcome. And I know how it feels to not feel either of those things. And so I definitely want to promote that. Yeah. So I don't have anything else on my own agenda. I know that we have around 20 minutes left. So again, I wanted to, ask if anyone had any thing they wanted to share. What do you think about these foundations of accountability? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Any questions? Is there any way that you've implemented accountability or enforced accountability in your own interactions with government? It doesn't have to be related to children, of course. But yeah, I'm definitely willing to open the floor to anyone wanting to share. And if not, then I guess we could, if there are no other questions for me, then I guess we could close early. But yeah, I'd love to continue talking with you all. Yeah. Oh, it's so cool that it was mentioned in another session. I'm glad that this is being spoken about. Like that's just really impressive, and heartwarming as well. And yeah, it is really hard. But yeah, I've seen it firsthand, and the folks that mentioned that in the other session probably have as well. And I hope that in bringing more awareness to this problem, we can sort of nip it in the bud, right? And talk about it and welcome youth in an engaging and fulfilling way. Okay. Indigenous Jack Talk session. Youth wants to be heard. They want to be involved in decision making of this distribution. Yes, exactly. Oh yeah, that's a really good point that you mentioned, Jessica, at the end of your paragraph, mentioning that government officials need to stop making appearances and really engage better. That is definitely a perspective that that I remember, hearing in depth about during our roundtables and engagement process. I've heard a youth share that they've sort of been used as a political tool in the past. That their experiences were sort of employed and publicized highly by a political party, or a member of a political party, and they sort of felt like a pawn within their political plan and strategies. And so that was really hard to hear, but really important to hear as well, because sometimes youth will be involved in governmental context, but not in a way that is fulfilling and empowering to them. Exactly. Tokenism, totally. It's like a youth specific political tokenism. It's very specific to our times right now, and it's hard to sort of prevent it from happening because, again, this is really an emerging practice. It's rare that we would have 19-year-olds be involved in a forum among federal, provincial, and territorial ministers of Canada that are responsible for human rights. It's definitely new territory that we're entering. But another part of my advocacy, actually, that I'm sort of starting right now is the importance of ethical youth engagement. That's something that I am looking into. I'm starting to sort of do a little bit of research on, because I've had pretty difficult experiences throughout these 3 years as a child rights advocate and a child/youth myself. It's definitely been difficult. I've definitely felt exploited. I've certainly been exploited by certain organizations. For example, there was one point where this Children's Aid Society invited me to speak at one of their events, and they had me, go into depth about my experiences in foster care. And I think it's needless to say that foster care is very traumatizing. It's very difficult, and I've had a very difficult life. And so I spoke to that at this meeting, and beforehand, I was promised honoraria for my labor and for my time, as well as my emotional hardship as well. Because in preparing my speech for that organization, I literally I sobbed, I cried, I struggled because having to relive your trauma for the purpose of a presentation, it's still having to relive your trauma, right? It's still difficult. It's still painful. So I did that for that organization, and after I presented, they just completely ghosted me. They just disregarded me. I did not get my honorarium, and there's no legal protection for me or for any youth in that situation. If youth were to be promised honoraria for their labor or for their time, there is no legal repercussion for those that do not follow through. Again, this is speaking to accountability. Funnily enough, it's something that is honoraria and paying youth right now. It exists beyond our legal considerations of exploitation and harm. Right now, at least in Ontario, honoraria is seen as a completely optional thing, and it is, right? That's sort of what the definition is, optional compensation. But the problem is that, if we're having youth do the work and they're not getting compensated, how is that not exploitation, right? And especially when we're considering that these are children, right? These are children that aren't being paid, that aren't given a salary or any wage for their work. And so, this is definitely something that we need to work on. I'm brainstorming as much as possible on how we could mobilize change in that regard specifically. But yeah, my experiences and the experiences of other youth have definitely shown that, engagement has been harmful when it does take place. And, that's almost worse than youth engagement not happening at all, in my opinion, at least. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jessica. I really appreciate your kind words. Yeah. So again, I'll wait just a minute or two. If there are no more questions, then you can feel free to take a break, get a glass of water, get a snack. I can imagine that it's been a long day for many of you. So thank you for being involved within this convention. We really appreciate your listening ears and your open hearts. Thank you so much. And yeah, I'll stick around for any questions or comments, but it doesn't seem to be many. So I hope you all have a great day. Yeah. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Helene. So for those of you who may not have seen, there was a Mentimeter link shared in the chat. And within the link, you'll be able to share what you are taking away from the session. You'll be able to identify situations or policies that need to change and emerging topics in your opinion. So feel free to interact with the link at any time, even after the session ends or even after you leave. And that was put in the chat by Celine. So yeah, feel free to follow that link. Thank you so much, Nexi. I appreciate it. All right, everyone. Well, yeah, make sure to get that link. And yeah, thank you so much for listening, and you have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Thanks so much, Jessica. Okay, it seems like there are no more questions coming in or comments. So I will take my leave. I will paste my email in the chat, and I'll go back to the slide with the CCRC's email as well. And through our emails, you can feel free to reach out to us and chat at any time if you have any questions or if you want to collaborate.